Section 8 of Library Essays, Papers Related to the Work of Public Libraries. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ted Leinhart. Library Essays, Papers Related to the Work of Public Libraries by Arthur Elmore Bostwick. Old Probabilities in the Library. His Modest Vaticinations, Part 1. Don't never prophesy unless you know, says Hosea Bigelow. I beg to call attention to the fact that this means don't prophesy at all. Perhaps it was so meant by the shrewd Hosea. We never can know, and yet we continue to prophesy. The best we can do, of course, is to estimate probabilities. Probabilities, that is a good word. They have dropped it from the weather reports and call their estimate a forecast. I like the old word better. Let us see, then, what some of the probabilities are in library work. Everything flows, said the Greek philosopher. Nothing in the world is stable. Change is the order of the day. But note the word he uses. That which flows is in a state of orderly change in a definite direction. Everything progresses, and the library and its work are being borne along in the general current. Now the writers on hydrodynamics, who are experts on blow, tell us that there are two ways of studying a current, which they name the historical and the statistical. In the former, the attention is fixed on a definite particle of the moving fluid, whose change of velocity and direction is noted as it passes along. In the latter, a definite locality of the stream is selected and the fluid's changes of form and density at that particular place are observed. In like manner, we may study the library movement historically, or we can select a definite point in its course, the present time, and note the conditions and their alteration. The latter plan, I venture to think, is the more favorable one for the would-be prophet. Let us then take a few of the salient features of library work as they exist today and inquire, 1. What is the present situation with regard to each? 2. Is that situation changing, and whither and how fast? 3. Is its rate of change altering? And 4. Are the conditions that affect it and its alteration likely to remain as they are? If we can answer all these questions, we can at least make an attempt at estimating the probable situation at a given future time. We must bear in mind, however, that in the library world, as elsewhere, there are sudden or abrupt changes or catastrophes, and that these generally defy prediction. And this is equally true of unexpected aids or beneficent influences. The library benefactions of Mr. Carnegie would have upset the most careful and logistical estimate of library progress made 20 years ago. First, let us take up the status of our stock in trade, our supply of books. President Eliot warned us 2 years ago that our books are piling up too fast. His warning has met with scant heed because experience has not brought it home to most of us. Malthus warned us long ago that the progress of population was toward overcrowding the world. We laugh at him because there is still plenty of room and means of utilizing an unknown in his time. Yet population increases, and it will overcrowd the world someday unless something occurs to prevent. In like manner, our stock of books increases faster and faster. The ordinary American public library is a thing of yesterday. Small wonder that it does not yet begin to feel plethoric. Our oldest large libraries are those of our universities, and Harvard's president has told us that to them the evil day is within sight. Librarians have not received with favor President Eliot's plea for getting us out of our future difficulty, but this is neither here nor there. To judge by our present attitude, either our library buildings must increase indefinitely in size, or our stock must be weeded out. It must be remembered, however, that our books are perishable and are growing more so. I do not regard this as an unmixed evil. Rather than to make our books unwieldy for the purpose of preserving them, we prefer to make them usable and to rely on reprinting for their perpetuation. Thus, what is not wanted will pass away. Perhaps this will solve our problem for us. but in any case it looks as if the future library building and its contents were to be greatly larger than those of today. What are to be the style and arrangement of the future library building? The present situation can hardly be described in general terms. As in all building operations, there is a strife between the architect, representing aesthetics, and the administrator, representing utility. At present, the architect seems to be having his way outside and the librarian his way inside. But why this contest? Is it not the architect's business to make utility more beautiful but not less useful? And should not the administrator wish his surroundings to please the eye? Apparently, the two are drawing a little closer together of late. We are having fewer temples of art that have to be made over to fit them for use as libraries, and fewer buildings that are workable but offensive to the eye. The tendency seems to be towards simple dignity, although we certainly have some surprising departures from it. Probably the library of the future will be a simple and massive structure of much greater size than at present, with its decorations largely structural and combining ample open shelf and reading facilities with greatly increased capacity for book storage. There is one particular in which the architect has been specially out of touch with the administrator. The open shelf is now all but universal, but many architects seem not to have heard of it. Many buildings, actually intended for administration on the free access system, seem yet to have been planned as closed-shelf libraries and open to the public as an afterthought. A library without a special stack room for book storage is an unthinkable thing to most architects. And yet, in many small libraries, book storage is not necessary. And in most branch libraries, where only books in general use are to be placed, it will never be necessary. To get the maximum advantage from open shelves, with a minimum of risk, the books should be placed on the walls as far as possible, and such bookcases as stand on the floor should be as low as an ordinary table, so as to be easily overseen. A stack room, it seems to me, is distinctly a closed-shelf arrangement. I believe this is coming to be recognized, and that in the future library the books will be on or near the walls. But how about the open-shelf system itself? At present, there are few libraries that do not have it in some form, and some of these are libraries that continued strongly to disapprove of it even after it had become well and widely established. The indications are nearly all that it has come to stay. I say nearly all, for there is still a feeling among many people that it is not good administration to abandon so large a percentage of our books to thieves. In libraries in small communities where the loss is small, this question does not arise. But in New York, for instance, where we lost 5,000 books last year, it is serious. We librarians may say and believe that the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages, but trustees and municipal authorities are hard to convince. In New York, we have taken what many will consider a backward step by partially closing, as an experiment, the shelves of 2 of our branches, so that although we may safely say that free access has come to stay, I do not look to see it applied very generally to large collections. One thing seems to me clear. Library administration is becoming increasingly businesslike, and it is not businesslike to accept a large annual loss without an attempt to minimize it. We must at least investigate regularly and rigidly the sources and character of this loss. As for the other features that we have become accustomed to regard as distinguishing the new library era from the old, special work with children, cooperation with schools, traveling libraries, etc., it is evident that these too have come to stay. Their spheres are widening and their aims are diversifying, however, so that he who should venture to predict their precise status in the future would be rash. In fact, the library idea itself is beginning to suffer a sort of restless change that is quite distinct from its orderly progress. The activities of the library are at present a good deal like those of the amoeba, stretching out a tentacle here, withdrawing one there, improvising a mouth and then turning it into a stomach, shifting and stretching about, somewhat vague and formless, yet instinct with life, appetite, and caution, and vitalized with at least the germ and promise of intelligence. Such a state is an unpromising one for prophecy. Is this or that new development of activity the beginning of an orderly march in a straight line, or is it to be withdrawn or reversed tomorrow? Is our work with children to include much that now seems to belong to the kindergarten, the museum, and the art gallery? Are our traveling library departments to sell books in the future as well as lend them? Are we to deliver books free at our users' homes? Are our boards of education to turn over to us the superintendence of all such work as deals with books and their use? Many questions like these would have been answered in the affirmative yesterday, but in the negative today. I might be inclined to say yes to some of them now, when tomorrow would prove them out of the question. But there is one assertion that we can make boldly. Whatever the library has tried to do or to be, whether success or failure has attended it, it has never ceased to be a library, a keeper and purveyor of books. Whatever else it may undertake, we may be sure that this will continue to be its chief reason for existence, and that its other activities, if such there be, will grow out of this and group themselves around it. Is the library to grow into a bookstore? I do not know, but if so, its commercial functions are likely to be subsidiary. Certain libraries have already added to their duties as free institutions the functions of pay libraries, and the commercial feature has thus been introduced. It seems to be spreading, and it may prove an entering wedge for a system of actual sales to supplement that of paid loans. A powerful deterrent, however, will be the influence of the book trade. Following the line of least resistance, the activity of the library as an aid to the ownership as well as the reading of books is perhaps more likely to manifest itself in advice than in actual trade. Some libraries are now making special effort to give their readers information about book prices and about places and methods of purchase, and it seems likely that this kind of aid, since it can arouse no opposition, will increase. The position in which we find ourselves, of opposition to those who make and sell books, is unfortunate. The situation has been growing more and more tense, and it may continue so to grow, perhaps up to the point where all discount will be withheld from libraries and where new legislation may discourage importation, but I do not believe that it will keep on indefinitely. No one who looks into the matter closely can help believing that in the long run, libraries advertise the book trade and help it by promoting general interest in literature. This view of the matter was taken by a majority of the New York Booksellers League at a recent dinner at which the question was discussed. Even purely as a matter of business, the library deserves special privileges, and it will doubtless continue in some measure to receive them. It does not, however, seem probable that the average cost of books to a public library will ever be as low again as it was, say, 10 years ago. In fact, this may be said of all library expenses. Salaries are rising and ought to rise higher. Our buildings are larger and finer and demand more expensive care. We are heating them with more costly apparatus and lighting them with electricity. The library of the future will doubtless cost more to maintain in every item than the library of the past, but the public will receive more than the difference. As regards children's work, there seem to be at present two tendencies, one toward complete isolation and one in the opposite direction. Will our grandchildren, when they go to the public library, be segregated in a separate room, perhaps in a separate building, or will they be treated as a distinct class only so far as may be absolutely necessary for good administration? Probably complete separation is best for the library and best for the adults. I hesitate to say that it is best for the children. After all, childhood is but a stage and not a resting state at that, rather restless and progressive. Any special conditions that we provide for it must themselves be subject to constant change. In our schools, the child passes from grade to grade. In our libraries, the grades are only 2. Let us not make the leap from one to the other too great. I look to see special library work for children increase in importance, but with due recognition of the fact that some of the needs and aspirations of a grown-up are present in many a 12-year-old, and that it is better that the clothes of a growing child should be a size too large than an exact fit. The traveling library deserves a special word because its success is indicative of the tendency to bring the book and its user into closer contact. In New York, we began, only 7 years ago, to circulate a few hundred books monthly in this way among half a dozen schools. Now we give out nearly 500,000 a year from nearly 500 different points. We hear the same tale from all sides, and the cost of circulation per book is surprisingly small. In New York, the circulation through traveling libraries is equal to that of 3 branches of the first class, while the number of assistants employed is about half the number required in one of those branches. The cost of operating 3 large branches in Carnegie buildings is about $40,000 yearly, whereas our traveling libraries for the last fiscal year cost us but $6,400. Of course, it must be remembered that a very large amount of the work of circulation in this case is done by volunteer assistants, and that the users of the books have not the facilities and resources of a branch library, the number and variety of books, the pleasant surroundings, the trained aide. Of course, the traveling library can never take the place of the fully equipped branch, but in supplementing branch work and in reaching those who live in sparsely settled communities, its capabilities are great, and it may be expected that its use will increase. The broadening of library work, illustrated by the successive appearance of the reference library, the circulating library, the delivery station, the branch, and the traveling library, suggests the thought that this series may be carried further in the future by the addition of some working plan that will bring the book still closer to its user. Such a plan would be the system in which books are delivered free of charge at the houses of those who use them, or the provision of a real library on wheels, a van supplied with shelving for 1,000 books or more from which selection can be made as it moves about from house to house. It does not seem probable that any such device as this will be generally adopted for districts adequately provided with regular libraries, but for thinly settled regions they may supplement or take the place of our present traveling or home libraries. I believe, for instance, that a moving library of 1,000 books, calling once a week at each house in a farming district, would be preferable to 4 traveling libraries of 250 books each, stationed at points in the same district, although, of course, the cost would be correspondingly greater. The library's status as an educational institution seems now to be well established. No one disputes it, and as this appears to be the chief ground on which its support by public funds is justified, we may regard it as settled that the library is to continue to play its part in public instruction. This part, though not so definite and positive as that of the school, extends over a far longer period. While the library's work is parallel and supplementary to that of the school in the case of those of school age, it must continue its work alone after its users have left school. Here it may settle its methods for itself, but in its earlier work, when it deals with pupils, it has the teacher to reckon with. The necessity for constant consultation and cooperation between the authorities of 2 public institutions, whose work is so similar and can so easily result in wasteful duplication or still more wasteful conflict, is obvious. We need not be surprised that librarians and teachers are getting nearer together, and we may confidently predict that the rapprochement will be closer in the future. But although the school is ceasing to look upon its younger sister as an interloper in the pedagogical family, there is still plenty of room for the definition of their respective spheres. And we have no right to complain that the school is still doing much library work, when we have ourselves sometimes tried to do school work. I look in the future for the definition of 2 clearly separated spheres of activity, one filled by the library and the other by the school, and for the closest cooperation between the 2 that is consistent with confining each to its own work. It is probably too much to expect that the school will give up the custodianship of books. It must at least control its own textbooks, and its collection of reference works should be complete enough to constitute a thorough guide and aid to proper study. But the distribution of supplementary reading should be the part of the public library. This and other related points are to be settled, if at all, in the future by two kinds of mutual understandings, namely between the governing boards of library and school and between librarian and teacher. The due definition of spheres of work can come only from an official agreement between library board and school board. Helpful aid on both sides can come only from an official agreement between library board and school board. Helpful aid on both sides can come only from personal contact and acquaintance between teachers and library assistants. Such a degree of acquaintance between teachers and library assistants, such a degree of acquaintance that each comes to have a practical knowledge of the other's problems, trials, and limitations. Most librarians have made more or less effort in this direction. Some have met with distinguished success. We may safely predict further progress along this line. End of section 8.